Welcome to this explainer on the foundations of GE 119. Today, we're going to unpack the legal mandate and, honestly, the absolutely fascinating 19th century historical context behind the required study of Dr. Jose Rizal in Philippine higher education. Whether you're a student, an educator, or just someone who really loves history, understanding the exact forces that shaped a national hero is just absolutely crucial. We aren't merely looking at one man here. We're looking at an entire era. Now, grounded in the rigorous outcomes-based education syllabus from Bernardo College, this masterclass-style explainer is specifically designed to build your historical consciousness and critical thinking. Studying Rizal isn't just a casual reading assignment. It's a highly structured academic journey fully aligned with said standards, meant to evaluate his reformist ideas and really figure out how those concepts map directly to our civic responsibility today. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The mandate of RA 1425. 2. The 1950s legislative debates. 3. 19th century economic shifts. 4. Social and educational reforms. 5. Political realities and phraseology. And finally, 6. Contextualizing the hero. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, the mandate of R 1425, understanding the legal foundation. So, Republic Act number 1425, which most of us just call the Rizal Law, is a piece of legislation from 1956. It explicitly mandates that all educational institutions, public, private, from grade schools all the way to universities, have to offer courses about Jose Rizal. And they specifically have to focus on his two great novels, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. But you have to ask yourself why. This wasn't just about reading history for history's sake. Put yourselves in the shoes of the Philippines in the 1950s. The country was still heavily recovering from the devastation of World War II and, frankly, grappling with a major post-war identity crisis. This law was a deliberate, highly strategic move to rededicate the lives of the youth to the ideals of freedom and nationalism. It was all about using the past to anchor the nation's future. Moving right along to Section 2, the 1950s legislative debates, friction, and factions. Now, the journey of this bill from a simple proposal to an actual law, it was anything but smooth. It was highly contentious and perfectly captures the intense friction of that specific era. On one side, you've got the proponents, most notably Senators Claro M. Recto, who was the main author, and Jose P. Laurel. They passionately championed this bill. Their argument was that the youth really needed to read Rizal's original, unedited works to truly absorb his nationalistic ideals and comprehend the ultimate sacrifices made for the country. But then, on the opposing side, you had the Catholic Church in the Philippines. Their opposition was firmly rooted in the fact that Rizal's novels contained strong anti-clerical themes, specifically heavy critiques of the abuses committed by the Spanish friars. The church argued that making these unexpurgated texts compulsory could actually compromise the faith of Catholic students. So we're looking at a profound clash of values here, state-driven nationalism right up against institutional religious concerns. The law eventually passed, of course, but this perfectly illustrates the objective reality of that legislative battleground back in 1956. Which brings us to Section 3, 19th century economic shifts connecting to global trade. Okay, let's dive into this, because to truly grasp what Rizal was writing about and why it was considered so explosive centuries later, we've got to step back from the 1950s and look at the massive economic engine of the 19th century Philippines. The real turning point is right there in the middle. Before the 1800s, the Philippines was pretty economically isolated under the restrictive Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, but the 19th century completely shattered that isolation. Look at 1869, the opening of the Suez Canal. I cannot overstate this. It was an absolute game changer. This engineering marvel drastically shortened the travel time between Europe and Asia. Almost overnight, the Philippines was plugged directly into world trade. And this newly accessible global market demanded raw materials, which directly sparked the rise of an incredibly lucrative agricultural export economy in the late 1800s. Suddenly, crops like sugar, abaca, and tobacco were highly sought-after global commodities. Let's look at the ripple effects of that in Section 4. Social and educational reforms, the rise of the ilustrados. Well, money changes everything, right? That agricultural boom we just talked about didn't just enrich the Spanish crown. It created a seriously wealthy local middle class. We're talking about the inquilinos, who were wealthy tenant farmers, and the principalia, the local elite. Because these families were finally generating substantial wealth from the export economy, they could actually afford higher education for their kids. And conveniently, right around the same time, the Spanish government implemented the Educational Decree of 1863, aiming to establish a public school system. This created a perfect storm. You mix new local wealth with expanded educational access, and what do you get? You birth a highly educated, progressive class of Filipinos known as the Ilustrados, literally the enlightened ones. Jose Rizal, who came from a very prosperous Inquilino family in Laguna, was a direct product of this exact socioeconomic shift. Let's get into the conflict in Section 5, Political Realities and Frailocracy, the colonial administration. So here is where the powder keg really gets lit. The rapid economic and educational progress of these Filipinos violently collided with a stagnant, highly unstable colonial political system. And to understand Rizal's works, and honestly his eventual execution, you have to understand the concept of frailocracy. During the 19th century, Spain itself was dealing with immense political instability back home. Governments were rising and falling constantly. Because the colonial administration over in Manila was so chaotic and Spanish officials were coming and going so quickly, the true, continuous, day-to-day power in the local towns, the pueblos, rested firmly in the hands of the Spanish friars. This invisible government is what we call a frailocracy. The friars controlled practically everything: education, tax collection, public morals, the whole shebang. So just imagine the systemic friction this created. You've now got a rapidly growing class of wealthy, highly educated, globally aware Filipinos being managed and often oppressed by deeply entrenched, conservative local friars. That intense tension is exactly what fueled Rizal's pen. Which brings us perfectly to Section 6, contextualizing the hero, the individual, and society. So how does this all tie together? How does understanding this fulfill our outcomes-based education goals and actually explain the making of a national hero? Let's look at how these domains interact. Economically, you have the Suez Canal creating a booming export economy. Socially, that wealth, paired with the 1863 Educational Decree, produces this brilliant, educated Ilustrado class. And politically, instability in Spain leads right to the suffocating local grip of the frailocracy. You see, Rizal didn't just pop out of a vacuum. He was a direct, inevitable product of this exact intersection. He had the wealth to travel and get an education, he had the intellect to recognize the sheer injustices of the frailocracy, and he had the platform to articulate the deep frustrations of a rapidly changing society. Understanding these intersecting domains is literally the key to understanding why RA 1445 mandates his study in the first place, because his life perfectly mirrors the birth of the Filipino national consciousness itself. Based on everything we've unpacked today, the ideals behind the RA 1425 mandate, the massive economic shifts, the rise of the educated middle class, and his intense fight against entrenched political power, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. If Dr. Jose Rizal were alive right now, navigating our modern era of social media, viral opinions, and digital activism, what role would he actually play? Would his sharp critiques make him a beloved influencer? Would his controversial takes get him totally canceled by netizens? Or would his challenge to the status quo make him a political prisoner all over again? Take a moment to think about how the historical concepts we covered today still heavily apply to our modern world. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history that shapes our present.